midnight screams.
2 years ago, my friend went missing from a hotel. I've been looking for her ever since. I'm sharing this because if I don't come back, well, the more people that know what happened, the better. Maybe then, someone will finally believe us. Every year since our college graduation, my best friend Liz and I would go on vacation together and visit a new city. As we were planning the trip for late summer 2021, she got an email saying she'd earned a free week-long stay at a hotel. She tends to travel a lot for business, so it's not too unusual for her to get a free night every now and then. One of the locations she could redeem it at was somewhere we hadn't been before, and it looked ritzy. It sounded perfect. As soon as we walked into the lobby, though, something felt off. I don't know how to explain it, other than that it had weird vibes. It looked like an old building that had been recently renovated, but the bright colors, lights, paintings, it felt like someone just slapped a thin, cheery veneer over decades worth of caked-on misery. The air just felt heavy. Liz didn't seem to notice it, at least not at first. The guy at the check-in desk stared at us for a while before muttering that he needed to talk to his manager. We were a bit worried that we were about to hear that the email she'd received had been a scam. But to our relief, he came back with a grin and said they'd upgraded our room. The city skyline and faint mountains in the distance that we could see from our window won me over. That first day was fine, but when I woke up the next morning, Liz was sitting motionless on her bed, her back to me. Liz? I repeated her name several times before finally walking over to tap her on the shoulder. Hey! She finally turned to me, spoke quietly, as if someone else might be listening. Did you hear it last night? I shook my head. Oh. She looked embarrassed for a moment, like she was unsure if she should continue. I couldn't sleep, not with the scratching behind the wall. She whispered eventually. I don't like it. I'm a heavy sleeper, a bit too heavy, honestly. At home, where it's just me, I have to set multiple alarms to make sure I wake up on time for work, and I've literally slept through a fire alarm once. Luckily, it's a false alarm. Liz was the opposite. Every little noise would wake her, so she always tended to have a rough first night or two as she became accustomed to the new sounds of a place. I thought maybe after a couple of nights she'd get used to it, or chalk it up to the building settling, especially in such an old place. I offered to ask for a different room, but she was worried they'd charge us. She said just try and ignore it. The day before we were supposed to check out, though, she shook me awake. Her eyes were wide and frantic as she stood over me. She'd moved her nightstand aside and was pointing at a small door, 3 or so feet tall, that had been behind it. The door was old-looking, dark wood with an antique knob, and stood in contrast to everything else in the bright and modern-looking room. Did you open it? She looked at me like I was out of my mind for even asking, and backed away as I approached it, for good measure. I figured that once we looked, we'd both feel better. I was wrong. As I carefully pushed it open, the smell of rust and bleach hit me immediately. The narrow space was long. It went further back than my phone light could reach from where I stood. After a few feet, it faded into blackness. Since it was only as tall and wide as the small door, I realized I'd have to crawl on my hands and knees to see how far it went back. I hate being in the dark, and can't stand small spaces, but when I looked over my shoulder at Liz and saw the bags under her eyes, the expression on her face, I figured I owed it to her to at least take a look. So I crawled in. Once I was a few feet inside, I saw that the small and narrow space ended at another wall, one plastered in yellowing wallpaper. It looked so old, I guessed it was probably a part of the original hotel. The dark, patterned carpet was dotted with stains, which seemed to be contributing to at least part of the strong smell. As I backed out, I thought I heard a faint whisper coming from behind the old wallpaper in front of me. As soon as I was all the way out, I had to fight the urge to slam the door shut and run. It felt so wrong in there. I wasn't sure what the purpose of that space had once been, but even then, I knew it was nothing good. "Hey," I whispered as soon as the door was closed, as I tried to nonchalantly move the end table back in front of it. "Why don't we pack up? We can find a different hotel for tonight." She seemed a bit calmer, said she could hang in there for the final night. After having been in that small space behind our wall, the thought of sleeping there another night honestly freaked me the hell out. But I figured that if she could make it through the last night, then so could I. After we turned out the lights that night, I remember seeing her dark silhouette sitting on the edge of her bed, motionless, until I fell asleep. That was the last time I ever saw her. When I woke up, it was almost noon. Both of our alarms were blaring. We were supposed to check out hours earlier. My confusion quickly turned to panic when I realized Liz wasn't in the room. Her suitcase, purse, phone, everything was still there. The main door was locked and chained from the inside, too. At first, I couldn't think of where else she could be until it hit me. There was one place I hadn't checked. The nightstand was still in front of the door, but I was fairly certain it was in a slightly different spot than we had left it the day before. Reluctantly, I slid it aside. "Liz?" No answer. She wasn't there. I did. See, though, what I'd thought had been a wall was opened slightly. I pushed it tentatively and took a sharp breath when I saw it led into a tunnel. It went so far back, far beyond the reach of the beam of my phone light. It looked endless. "Liz?" I got no response other than my own voice echoing back through the narrow space. I tried to tell myself that it would be okay. I had to go in, especially if Liz had gone in there too. I took a deep breath, nudged the false wall open all the way, and I entered. As I crawled on my hands and knees with my phone ungracefully held between my teeth, I tried to not think about the tight space and the pitch blackness as far as I could see in front of me, or picture what Liz would have been doing down there. I tried to not focus on the streaks of nearly dried blood along the floor. I had to keep going. I knew that Liz would do the same for me. I realized that I wasn't even sure how long she had been gone for. I promised myself the walls were not shrinking around me. It was my imagination. That this dark expanse couldn't go on forever. Eventually, the tight darkness would end. I kept repeating it to myself, over and over, as a mantra, just to keep myself going, to try and distract myself from the feeling of despair that seemed to fill the place. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel ended, opening into a room without lights or windows, but it was at least large enough that I could stand and stretch out my cramped muscles. All I could make out was wall-to-wall dark, crumbling bricks, and a weak-looking set of stairs that led above and below. It was so quiet there, so eerie. It was easy to forget that I was in a city packed with people, still inside a bustling hotel. When I shined my light upwards into the pitch blackness above my head, I could see the stairs leading to other platforms like the one I was standing on. It looked like the rooms above and below ours had similar tunnels. The smell of bleach had long been replaced by the scent of mildew and old things. It felt so wrong back there in a way that I couldn't put my finger on, that I couldn't help but shiver when wondering why it had been designed that way, what it had been used for. I assumed the stairs to the tunnels above me all led to other rooms, so I went down, the protesting metal echoing up into the huge empty space above my head. I finally reached a heavy door, and after being in the dark for so long, the bright sunlight hurt my eyes when I opened it. I was looking into the back alley outside, around the corner from where the hotel seemed to end. The door was covered with the same bricks as the rest of the building. It was so discreet that when I closed it behind me, it blended in perfectly with the outside wall. I remember running back inside and bracing myself against the counter while I tried to convey what I'd found to anyone that would listen. I still have the image in my mind of how the dried blood on my palms stood out starkly on the white marble. It was all I could focus on as the manager tried to calm me down. He said Liz probably just wandered off. People go off on their own all the time to explore the city, he told me. She'd likely come back later. She never did. I was the one that called the police, and the officer that came out chatted casually with the hotel manager for a long time. They checked the room. I showed him the door, but he didn't seem concerned. He just repeated what the manager said. Maybe she decided to start over and didn't want to be found. I was hysterical, pointed out that her purse and her phone were still in the room. She hadn't even taken her shoes. It's not uncommon, he told me, leaning in a little too close. A warning less subtle than his words was written across his face. For people to visit a city like this and never leave. I drove around for hours, asking shop owners and people outside if they'd seen her. None of them had. Eventually, I had to go home, back to work. The official story is still that she just left of her own volition. I don't believe it. Neither does her family or fiancé. Every so often, he and I would drive up there, just on the off chance that anyone had seen her, but we'd always get the same answer. He's the one that had the idea to book the same room again, to see what we could find in the tunnels. He must have called dozens of times. He'd try to make a reservation, ask if room 347 or any of the ones directly above it are available, and they'd always tell him no. We hadn't lost all hope, but we'd certainly lost most of it. Until a few days ago, I recently received an email invite letting me know I'd earned a free week, just like the one Liz received 2 years ago. I went to check in, and after looking me over, the guy manning the desk said he needed to get his manager. The manager, the same one as before, came out in person, and I was so worried he turned me away. But he simply smiled and informed me that my room had been upgraded. I'm sure you can guess my room number. I've been trying to stay awake each night. Although after everything that happened, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep here even if I wanted to. Every night, I've just been sitting in the dark, listening to the sounds coming from behind that awful door. Sounds that I could almost swear are a bit louder, a bit closer, each night. I'm supposed to check out tomorrow morning. I have a feeling that tonight, I'll finally find out what happened to Liz. Wish me luck. I can't believe that a few weeks have passed already. I'm sorry it took so long to get this update posted. Everything that happened has been a lot. to process. At first, I didn't want to even write it down. I didn't want to relive that night, but I guess I can't avoid it forever. Almost exactly 2 years to the day from my first post, my best, the friend Liz disappeared from room 347 inches for the middle of the final night of our stay. I woke up alone the next morning to the door still bolted from the inside. She had left everything behind. The only place she could have gone was through the dark, narrow space behind the small door and false wall leading from our room. Even after crawling through it myself, I never found her. The hotel manager and the police were not just insistent that she left of her own volition, but were almost threatening when I pushed further. Her fiancé, Jarrod, and I had been searching for her ever since. When I finally got the chance to stay in that same room again, hoping for even a slim chance of finding out what happened to her, I took it. So, I bought a little can of triple action pepper spray, packed a bag, and scheduled an email to go out to Jared the morning after the final night of my stay. You know, just in case I never came back. I've been home for a few weeks, and even now, I'm still struggling and trying to put some of the pieces together. I'm starting to accept that there are some things I may never fully understand. During my recent stay, I didn't spend much time in the room, with its overpowering smell of bleach mingled with something else that I couldn't quite place. Mostly, I tried to search the surrounding city for anything I may have missed before. And, of course, explored every part of that hotel that I could. Details I didn't catch during our first stay, or pay enough attention to before my final night a few weeks ago, are now haunting me. Details such as how a ritzy-looking hotel in the middle of a popular tourist destination never seemed to have anyone else in it, or how there was no way to get to the 7th floor. The buttons so casually skipped from 6 to 8 on the lone elevator, and from the main stairs what should have been the entrance was just a solid wall. As I traversed the winding hallways, I realized that on every floor that I could access, other than my own, the new carpet and cherry paint stopped abruptly after a certain point. As I ventured deeper into the hotel, I found myself surrounded by the original, fading wallpaper, stains marring the swirling patterns of the torn carpets. Even the light fixtures along the walls looked dated. Most struggled to stay on at all, often throwing the windowless halls into near darkness without warning. Whenever I crossed over to the old, unrenovated side, I always had a strange sense of discomfort, the kind you get when there's no one else around you, but you can tell that you are most certainly not alone. Traveling down those halls felt like stepping back in time, but to a time that was clearly better left forgotten. Initially, I thought maybe that was their way of saving money, neglecting the portions that most guests wouldn't venture to. One night, I was wandering around one of those eerily quiet floors, further in than I had ever gone before, and was drawn to a bit of brick peeking out from under cracked plaster and peeling wallpaper in the distance. It was almost entirely bathed in shadows, just beyond where the struggling hall lights had finally given up, and seemed older than everything else around it. There was a thin gap in the mortar, and while it was so dark that I couldn't see anything, I could feel a faint, stale breeze that carried with it an overpowering smell of rotting meat. Gagging, I turned around abruptly to see the hotel manager just a couple of feet behind me, his eyes glinting at me, unnatural looking in the low light. I pushed past him without incident, but I couldn't help but wonder if there had been other times he'd silently followed me down the dimly lit hallways without me noticing. After that, I made more of an effort to avoid him and his predatory smile. Every floor I could access had a similar makeshift wall in the same place. I eventually realized it was once a second elevator shaft, since bricked in and plastered over. Once, in the near silence, I thought I heard the sound of something moving behind it. It's probably easier to seal it off than to fix it, I told myself at the time. I preferred that explanation, rather than to acknowledge my distinct feeling that there was something, not someone, something, back there that I had no desire to meet. Eventually, I reached the final night of my stay, no closer to finding out what happened to her. The only thing left I could think to do was to try and recreate what I believed may have happened to her that night. As I prepared for bed, I shoved my phone in my pajama pocket and grabbed my little can of pepper spray. My grand plan at that point was to pretend to be asleep and see if anyone came for me that night. If they did, I'd hit them with the pepper spray and try and get a photo of them. It may not have been the best idea, but I knew it would be the last chance I'd ever get to find out what happened to her. After glancing nervously at my small can of pepper spray, I grabbed the Swiss Army knife off my keychain and shoved it in the other pocket for good measure. I began to wonder, as I stared up at the dark ceiling that night, in the exact room she'd disappeared from 2 years earlier, if they invited me there specifically for nothing to happen. I'd been telling anyone that would listen for years all about Liz's disappearance, about the narrow, dark space in our room I'd crawled through. Jared had been doing the same. Like I had said in my last post, he'd been trying to book that same room for years with no luck. What better way to further discount our concerns than for me to have a perfectly normal stay? Of course, nothing would happen, I realized, disappointed, although with the tiniest bit of guilt-tinged relief mixed in. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of furniture moving across the carpet. All the confidence and determination I'd felt in the daylight was gone in an instant. Never was I more aware that I was just one person alone in that awful place, armed with a phone, less than an ounce of pepper spray, and a tiny keychain knife. As in that moment where I wondered if someone would try and pull me out of bed and drag me into the dark. Maybe it would be easy enough to make me disappear inconspicuously, after all. They had my credit card information. What was stopping them from using it a few towns over and then throwing all my luggage in some ditch? As I heard the old hinges of the small door protest, a flurry of jumbled thoughts went through my head as I clutched my little canister to my chest. I had always assumed Liz to be alive, and that someone took her out of the room and into the tunnel. But what if she hadn't been? What if they killed her, and they did it right here? There had been blood in the small crawl space. Enough had soaked into the carpet that it was still wet by the time I went looking for her. I was in the room with her physically that night, but I'm such a heavy sleeper that she may as well have been alone. Another sharp pang of guilt crept in to mingle with the terror. After a moment, I heard what sounded like raspy, strained breaths, the sound filling the otherwise silent room. It grew louder as whatever it was, emerged and began to head towards me. And then, only a few feet away, they stopped. I was so worried that if they knew I was awake, they'd leave before I could find out what happened. I tried to keep my eyes squeezed shut and hoped they'd get just a bit closer to make sure they'd be in range of the spray, since I'd probably only have one chance at this. The waiting in those long moments, though, as I wondered who or what was in the room with me, I finally couldn't take it. My eyes shot open. I don't know what I thought I'd see looming over me in the darkness. A stranger? A monster? But I know who I did not expect to see. Liz. She was barefoot, illuminated in the faint moonlight shining through the open sliver between the curtains. It was dark, her face mostly obscured in the shadows and contorted slightly as if with a strange little smile, but I could tell it was her. I could feel it. I gasped, and she seemed almost as startled as I was, because she took off running. I had barely stumbled out of bed by the time she'd already ducked through the door, past the false wall, and was crawling through the dark passageway faster than seemed humanly possible. I hissed her name, trying to get her to stop, but she just kept going. It did feel wrong to me even then, as I followed her. If she'd truly been okay all this time, why hadn't she left and contacted her fiancé, or family, or friends? Why was she crawling around in the darkness behind the walls of this awful place, alone? But at the time, the only meaningful thought I could really focus on, overpowering in its insistence, was how I couldn't lose her again. While I was fumbling for my phone, I realized that Liz didn't have any source of light with her. She'd entered the tunnel the same way she left through it those years ago, in the pitch blackness. As I followed her, I realized what the smell had been in my room, that mixed with the bleach had been almost too faint to detect. But there, in that tight space, just feet behind her, I recognized it. Earthiness. Death. I knew something was wrong, but we're so close to the exit and I was too focused on getting her out of there, walking out that door and never coming back. Not for my purse, my shoes, anything, because I had a very strong suspicion that if I did, we would never leave that hotel again. As we reached the end and stepped out of the cramped space and into the familiar back room, I nearly cried in relief. We were only 2 flights of stairs above the exit. We were actually going to make it out, both of us. But she didn't go down. She started to go up. Liz! I pleaded for her to come back, told her I knew where the exit was, but she continued on as if she hadn't heard me. I pulled at her in desperation. She shook me off with strength I didn't know she possessed. Realizing she wasn't going to stop, I reluctantly followed, thinking she must have known something I didn't, a better way out. It was the only thing that made sense. She'd slowed her pace to allow me to catch up. She was no longer fleeing, she was leading. I'd been occasionally pausing to shine my flashlight down below us, deep-seated fear growing as the exit became further and further away, and was eventually swallowed up by the darkness entirely. After what felt to my tired legs like a lifetime, she stopped and began to enter another crawl space, heading back deeper into the hotel. I froze. The already intense sense of wrongness overwhelmed me at the thought of going in. She turned back to smile at me briefly from the darkness, and I realized then that everything was going to be okay. I had found her. I knew that following her was the right thing to do. The new feeling of calm overrode my deeply seated fear of seeing what was on the other side of the tunnel. So, I took a deep breath, and I found out what was on the 7th floor. I instantly felt much safer than I had anywhere else in that god-forsaken place as we stepped into the immaculate room that the tight tunnel opened into. This was a good place, safe. I was suddenly very confident that we were going the right way. I followed her out of the room and down an immaculate hallway to a huge ballroom. Art Deco details, the chandelier. It was beautiful. That much was obvious, even in the dark. I felt an odd sense of excitement at the thought of approaching it. nearly giddy at the sight of the elegant golden elevator at the end, the exit. Finally, I froze for a moment when I heard a door slam shut somewhere behind me. But no matter how hard I tried to hold on to that concern, the intense feeling of alarm, I couldn't. It was quickly gone, beyond my reach. Everything was fine. She stepped into the elevator and smiled at me over her shoulder. I knew that was where I needed to be. I was ready to leave. I was only a few feet behind her when I tripped and fell to the side. I felt around to see what I had tripped over. It was a single shoe, the canvas stiff with long dried blood. When I looked up from it in confusion, I realized that the entire room had changed. The air carried a hint of old things, mildew and despair. The chandelier hung at an odd angle, ruined, rendered dark and useless by decades of neglect. Glass from shattered and now boarded up windows littered the ground. The wooden floor was warped and stained, and the dated wallpaper had mostly peeled away. A sense of longing and ruin and sadness radiated through the huge room. I shivered as my beam illuminated what I had fallen into. A group of disintegrating suitcases. Torn clothes and other discarded belongings formed messy piles, encircling what had minutes ago appeared to be an elevator. With a new sense of horrified clarity, I realized what I'd almost stepped into, the open shaft, the one that had been walled up on every other floor. The doors were long gone, leaving only a few feet of damaged flooring between me and the 7-story drop below. Maybe if I had been paying more attention, I would have noticed the sound sooner, the familiar earthy rot smell on the stale air coming from within it. But I was focused on something snagged on the metal opening. I told myself it couldn't have been Liz's. It couldn't be the Melvin's shirt she bought at the concert we went to years ago. The one she had worn to bed that night. It could have been anyone's. Because Liz was fine. She was here with me. I heard the sound of something sharp on metal. The awful, ragged breaths she had been taking. I shined my flashlight up to see her slowly climbing up from the dark, gaping pit of the shaft. Her perfectly round eyes reflected back at me, like an animal's, like a predator. Something that evolved in the darkness and could see far better in the lightless space than I could ever hope to. What I thought had been a smile. I realized then that it, simply had more teeth than it could comfortably fit in its mouth. The more I stared, frozen, the more I realized how raw in the face all the details were. I couldn't understand how I didn't see it before, how I could have mistaken that thing for my best friend since childhood. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought the not Liz was the most terrible thing I would ever see in my life, until I noticed more of them crawling up the shaft behind her, when I saw what they looked like when they weren't attempting to imitate a person. I was suddenly very aware of the door I had heard open and close behind me moments before. True fear, I've since learned, is seeing something you can barely comprehend, much less hope to outrun, standing between you and the only exit. I realized I was just holding my phone. I'd lost my pepper spray at some point. So, I did the first thing I could think of. I shined my phone flashlight towards it, hoping that something so pale, that saw so well in the dark, that it wouldn't be able to handle the bright light. All I managed to do was get a clearer view of the two long limbs and those awful eyes as it continued towards me, unfazed. I fished my tiny knife out of my pocket and ran towards it. I didn't have any other plan. I just knew that I didn't want to die down there in the dark. With the haze I'd been trapped in earlier lifted, I became aware that the entire floor smelled like death. Unlike the room downstairs, no one had felt the need to try and mask it with a splash of bleach. Some doors had long fallen off their hinges and formed additional obstacles as they lay splintered. I tried dodging around the thing in the hall, but it managed to grab me, leaving a deep gash in my leg as it tried to pull me to the ground. I stabbed at it until it let go. All the blood, not sure whether it was its or mine, allowed me to slip through its grasp. At the end of the hall was the room we'd entered through. 747 crudely painted on the door. This time around, I realized it was filled with the remains of decaying furniture, along with other things I'd rather forget. I was actually relieved to shove myself back into the tight, lightless passageway, but not as much as I was when I stepped out of it. I was only 2 flights from the exit when I heard a chorus of wheezing breaths above me. I made the mistake of looking up, saw so many eyes trained on mine. There was another familiar face among them, wearing his usual predator's grin. I moved as fast as my tired, bleeding legs could carry me. Hearing them quickly close the distance between us was an excellent motivator. I was only a few feet ahead of them by the time I stumbled out the back exit, and I didn't stop running, unsure if they would follow me outside. Finally, I turned back to see nothing was there. I still didn't feel safe until I'd called Jared, and I was in the car with him and almost home. I refused to go to the hospital in that town. I didn't trust anyone. I was so afraid that they'd put me under, take me back to the hotel, and I'd wake up on the 7th floor again. Or maybe I wouldn't wake up at all. So, yes, I did make it home, but I wish I had a happier update to give. I still wonder who Liz must have seen in our room that night, who she would have followed so blindly. I try not to think about what must have happened afterwards. It's too painful. I haven't been able to sleep much since I've been home. All I see whenever I close my eyes are those things staring at me from down the dark hallway of the 7th floor. There's something else that's been keeping me awake, too. I had originally booked my reservation with a fake address, but in addition to everything else, I left my purse and ID behind when I fled my room. It's been a few weeks now, but I still can't help but wonder if soon I'll see those perfectly round eyes glinting at me from within the darkness of my own home, too.